Welcome back, and thank you for tuning in to Cheating Stories Hub. We appreciate every single one of you. We'd love to know what part of the world are you watching from right now. Let us know in the comments now. Let's dive into today's story. Chapter 1, The Breaking Point. Where the hell are you? I barked into the phone, my voice sharp with a mix of desperation and fury. The chaos of the hospital hallway around me, nurses rushing past, machines wailing, the antiseptic smell filling the air, only heightened my sense of helplessness. Behind me, a team of doctors worked frantically to stabilize my son, Ethan, whose small, fragile body lay at the center of their attention. "I'm in a meeting," Jessica replied calmly on the other end, her tone detached, like she was discussing office schedules rather than her child fighting for his life. "A meeting?" I spat, my grip tightening on the phone as I paced the sterile corridor. "You mean with Robert?" "Don't lie to me, not now." Her silence was deafening. It wasn't denial, it was confirmation. The cold, calculated pause that told me everything I already feared. "I'll be there soon," she finally said, her words clipped, as if my call was an inconvenience. "Soon," I hissed, my voice trembling with rage and despair. "Ethan doesn't have soon, Jessica. Either you get here now, or don't ever call yourself his mother again." I hung up, my chest heaving, every muscle in my body tense with an anger I could barely contain. My thoughts were racing, torn between the agony of watching Ethan slip away and the white-hot fury that consumed me at Jessica's indifference. For months, I'd suspected something was off, the whispered calls, the unexplained trips, the growing emotional distance. But this was beyond anything I could have imagined. 2 agonizing hours passed before Jessica finally arrived. When she walked in, it wasn't with the panic or urgency of a mother rushing to her son's side. No, she strolled in like she was heading to a corporate meeting, her heels clicking sharply against the tile floor. Her outfit, a tailored navy blazer and skirt, was pristine, her hair perfectly styled. She looked immaculate, composed, detached. "What happened?" she asked flatly, barely glancing toward the ICU doors. My voice cracked with disbelief. "What happened?" I echoed. "What happened is that your son is dying, Jessica. Dying. And you were too busy with Robert to give a damn." Her expression barely shifted, save for a flicker of annoyance that crossed her face. "I told you I had a meeting," she said coolly. "I can't drop everything every time you panic." The audacity of her words hit me like a blow. I stepped closer, my voice dropping to a dangerous growl. "Panic? Your son is fighting for his life, and you think I'm overreacting." Her gaze finally met mine, and for a moment I thought I saw something, regret, guilt, maybe even humanity. But then it was gone, replaced by the same cold indifference that had become her default. She sighed and walked past me, stopping just short of the ICU's glass wall. She peered in, her expression as blank as ever. "He looks fine to me," she said, her tone utterly devoid of emotion. I froze, stunned into silence. "He looks fine." I finally managed, my voice rising. "Jessica, he flatlined earlier. They brought him back, but they don't know how long he has. And you're standing here, acting like this is just another item on your to-do list." Her eyes narrowed as she turned to face me, her posture rigid. "Don't make this about me, David. You're the one who's always been controlling, always demanding. Maybe if you'd paid more attention to me, I wouldn't have needed Robert." Her words landed like a sledgehammer, knocking the wind out of me. I stared at her, my mind reeling, unable to comprehend the sheer cruelty of blaming me for her affair while our son lay dying just feet away. "You're unbelievable," I said finally, my voice low and venomous. "This isn't about us, Jessica. It's about Ethan. It's about the life you've been so quick to throw away for some pathetic fling." She rolled her eyes, the dismissive gesture fanning the flames of my fury. "You always make everything so dramatic, David. I don't have time for this." And with that, she turned on her heel and walked away, not into the ICU to see her son, but toward the elevators. I stood there, watching her leave, something inside me breaking. This wasn't just betrayal. It was abandonment. She was choosing him, Robert, over Ethan, over me, over our family. As the elevator doors closed behind her, a single chilling thought settled in my mind. This wasn't just a marriage falling apart. This was war. Chapter 2. Betrayal unfolds. The hospital's cold, white walls seemed to close in on me as Jessica's indifferent departure echoed in my mind. My fists clenched involuntarily as I leaned against the window, staring blankly at the street below. Inside the ICU, Ethan lay surrounded by wires and machines, his small chest rising and falling with a mechanical rhythm. The boy who once filled the house with laughter and mischief was now fighting for every breath. And his mother. She couldn't even stay to hold his hand. I stormed out of the ICU hallway, needing air, needing to think. My phone buzzed in my pocket, and I snatched it up, hoping for some news from the doctors. Instead, it was a text from one of Ethan's nurses. We've stabilized him for now. Relief washed over me, though it was short-lived. I glanced back at the hospital's entrance, the weight of Jessica's betrayal still bearing down on me. As I paced the parking lot, a thought struck me. Jessica wasn't just indifferent. She was hiding something. The coldness in her voice, the ease with which she walked away, it wasn't just apathy. It was calculated. She didn't care, and worse, she didn't want to be here. My stomach churned as months of suspicious behavior flashed through my mind. Unexplained late nights, distant stares, and that ever-present phone glued to her hand. Without thinking, I dialed her number. The phone rang repeatedly before she finally answered. "What now, David?" she snapped, her irritation evident. "You're unbelievable," I snarled. "You couldn't even pretend to care for 5 minutes. Do you even care about Ethan? About anything besides yourself and Robert?" Her sigh on the other end of the line was infuriatingly calm. "I told you, I'm dealing with a lot right now. You're not making this easier." "No, Jessica," I shot back, my voice trembling with rage. "You're not dealing with anything. I'm here fighting for Ethan while you're busy screwing around with Robert. But guess what? I'm done playing the fool." The line went silent for a moment before she laughed, a cold, mocking sound that sent chills down my spine. "You're always so dramatic, David," she said, her voice dripping with disdain. "Maybe if you weren't so controlling, I wouldn't need a reason to look elsewhere." I ended the call, my hands shaking with fury. I didn't need her excuses. I needed answers. My jaw tightened as I got into my car, the engine roaring to life. I wasn't going to let this slide. If Jessica wanted to play games, I was ready to confront her lies head-on. 15 minutes later, I pulled into the parking lot of Robert's car dealership. The man himself was leaning against the counter, chatting casually with a customer. The moment he saw me, his face drained of color, and he quickly excused himself. "David," he stammered, holding up his hands defensively as I marched toward him. "I wasn't expecting." "No, you weren't," I cut him off, slamming a folder onto the counter. Inside were bank statements, proof of the money Jessica had funneled into a mysterious account. "Tell me about this." "No." Robert's eyes darted around the room like a cornered animal. "I don't know what you're talking about," he mumbled, his voice shaky. "Don't lie to me," I growled, leaning in closer. "This is my family's money. Money meant for Ethan's treatment. And you had no problem taking it." He fidgeted, his hands trembling as he flipped through the papers. "She told me it was hers," he said quietly. "She said it was savings, something she'd been putting away for years." "It wasn't hers to give," I snapped. "And you knew it. So don't pretend you're innocent in all of this." Robert's face flushed, and he let out a heavy sigh. "She said she needed a safety net," he admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. "For when she left you." The words hit me like a freight train. My chest tightened, and for a moment I couldn't breathe. She wasn't just lying to me. She wasn't just betraying me. She was planning to leave Ethan and me completely. When? I demanded, my voice trembling. She didn't say, Robert muttered, avoiding my gaze. Just that she wanted to start fresh. Somewhere far away. My fists clenched at my sides as I tried to process the enormity of it all. Jessica wasn't just having an affair. She was plotting her escape, dismantling our family piece by piece while Ethan lay dying in a hospital bed. Was it worth it? I asked, my voice ice cold. Robert didn't respond, his head bowed in shame. I didn't wait for an answer. I turned and walked out, slamming the door behind me. The drive back to the hospital was a blur, my thoughts spiraling as I tried to make sense of Jessica's actions. She wasn't just reckless, she was dangerous. By the time I reached the parking lot, my phone buzzed again. It was Peter, my lawyer. I need your help, I said, my voice urgent. It's about Jessica. It's serious. Peter listened patiently as I explained everything. The affair, the money, and most damning of all, her plan to leave. Do you have proof? He asked, his tone sharpening. I have bank statements, transactions, and I'll get more if I have to. Good, Peter said. This is serious, David. If she's diverting family funds and planning to leave, we need to move fast. I'll start drafting paperwork for an emergency custody hearing. Gather everything you can. As I hung up, determination replaced the anger coursing through me. Jessica thought she could walk away unscathed, that she could abandon us without consequences. But she was wrong. For Ethan's sake, I would fight her every step of the way. That night, I sat by Ethan's bedside, his small hand resting in mine. The rhythmic beeping of the machines filled the silence. His face was pale but peaceful, his body too weak to fight off the storm raging in our lives. Dad, he whispered, his voice barely audible. I'm here, buddy, I said, leaning closer. Where's Mom? The question hit me harder than any of Jessica's lies ever had. I swallowed hard, forcing my voice to stay steady. She'll be here soon, I lied, my chest tightening. He nodded faintly, his eyes fluttering closed as he drifted back into unconsciousness. In that moment, I made a promise to myself and to Ethan. I wasn't just going to protect him from Jessica. I was going to make sure she never had the chance to hurt him again. Chapter 3. The Revelation. The next morning, I arrived home for the first time in days. The house felt cold, lifeless, as if Jessica's betrayal had seeped into its very walls. Ethan's toys were scattered in the living room, a stark reminder of what I was fighting for. I headed straight for Jessica's office, my mind racing with questions. If she was planning to leave, there had to be evidence, something that connected the dots between her secret accounts and her sudden detachment. I tore through drawers, rifling through files and papers, searching for anything that could expose the full extent of her betrayal. Then, beneath a stack of tax documents, I found it, a hidden folder filled with receipts, hotel bookings, and dinner reservations. My heart sank as I flipped through the pages. Every entry was another knife in my back, proof of nights spent with Robert, of expensive meals paid for with money meant for Ethan's care. At the bottom of the folder, I found something even more damning, a flight itinerary for 2 to the Cayman Islands. The departure date was only 2 weeks away. My hands trembled as I stared at the paper, my stomach twisting in knots. Jessica wasn't just abandoning Ethan and me. She was fleeing the country. But that wasn't all. Buried among the receipts and itineraries was a transfer record showing tens of thousands of dollars moved to an offshore account. My chest tightened as I realized the depth of her betrayal. This wasn't just selfishness, it was calculated. She was draining our resources, leaving Ethan's future hanging by a thread, all to fund her escape. My phone buzzed in my pocket, jolting me out of my thoughts. It was Peter. Mark, he said, his tone tense. I filed the paperwork for the custody hearing. We're set for next week. I found more evidence, I said, my voice shaking. She's not just planning to leave. She's been funneling money into an offshore account. And she's booked flights she's planning to run. Peter paused for a moment before responding, his tone sharp. Give me everything you found. We'll use it in court. I hung up and stared at the documents spread out before me. Jessica wasn't just trying to escape her responsibilities. She was willing to sacrifice Ethan's well-being for her own selfish desires. Back at the hospital, Ethan was still unconscious when I returned. The rhythmic beeping of the machines was both a comfort and a reminder of how fragile his life had become. I sat by his bedside, holding his hand, the weight of everything pressing down on me. Later that evening, I decided to confront Jessica. If she thought she could run, she needed to know I wasn't going to let her get away with it. I called her, the anger simmering just beneath the surface. What do you want, Mark? She answered, her tone clipped and impatient. We need to talk, I said, forcing my voice to remain calm. I found your little escape plan. There was a pause on the other end, then a sigh. I don't know what you're talking about. Don't lie to me, Jessica, I snapped. I found the receipts, the flight bookings, the transfers. You've been planning this for months. Did you think I wouldn't figure it out? Her silence was damning. Ethan deserves better than this, I continued, my voice rising. He deserves a mother who cares, not someone who's ready to abandon him the moment things get tough. Don't lecture me, Mark, she finally said, her voice icy. You think you're some saint? You've been suffocating me for years, always demanding, always controlling. I need a fresh start, and I won't apologize for it. A fresh start, I repeated, incredulous. While your son is fighting for his life. You're unbelievable. I'm not doing this with you, she said sharply. You think you can intimidate me, but you have no idea what I'm capable of. The line went dead, and I sat there seething. Jessica had made her choice, and it wasn't Ethan. She thought she could walk away from her responsibilities, from the mess she'd created, but I wasn't going to let her. Not without a fight. The next morning, Peter called again. Mark, I've been reviewing the account records you sent me. There's more to this than we realized. What do you mean? I asked, my heart pounding. The offshore account isn't just for savings, he said. It's linked to a network of shell companies. This isn't just about her trying to escape. It's potentially criminal. What kind of criminal? I pressed, my mind racing. Fraud, embezzlement, maybe even tax evasion, Peter explained. We're digging deeper, but you need to be prepared. If this goes public, it could get messy. I hung up, my thoughts spiraling. Jessica wasn't just reckless, she was dangerous. And now she wasn't just risking her own future. She was risking Ethan's too. I knew I had to act fast. That evening, I returned to the hospital and sat by Ethan's bedside. He stirred slightly, his weak eyes fluttering open. Dad, he whispered, his voice barely audible. I'm here, buddy, I said, gripping his hand tightly. Is Mom coming back? The question cut deeper than anything Jessica had ever said or done. I forced a smile, my heart breaking. She'll be here soon, I lied. He nodded faintly and drifted back to sleep, leaving me with the crushing weight of my promise. Jessica thought she could run, that she could leave us behind and start over without consequences. But she underestimated me. For Ethan's sake, I was ready to fight her every step of the way. Chapter 4, The Fallout begins. The morning of the custody hearing arrived faster than I had expected. I had spent the last week gathering every shred of evidence against Jessica. Bank statements, transfer records, flight itineraries, and even a copy of the custody motion her attorney had filed. I felt a sense of grim determination as I walked into the courthouse, the folder of documents under my arm like a shield against the chaos she had created. Jessica was already there when I entered, sitting at the defendant's table with her attorney. She wore a sleek black suit and carried herself with the same air of unbothered confidence that had infuriated me in the hospital. She barely acknowledged my presence, her attention fixed on her phone, as if this was nothing more than a minor inconvenience. The judge entered, and the courtroom settled into an uneasy silence. My attorney, Peter, was calm and methodical as he began presenting our case. He laid out the evidence piece by piece, starting with the bank statements that showed Jessica's diversion of funds meant for Ethan's medical treatment. Then came the receipts for her clandestine trips with Robert, followed by the damning flight itinerary. This evidence shows not just neglect, Your Honor, Peter stated firmly, but a calculated effort to abandon her family and evade her responsibilities. Jessica's attorney tried to counter, claiming that the funds were part of her personal savings and that the trips were business-related. But Peter was prepared. Your Honor, Peter continued, we'd like to call a witness to testify to the nature of these trips and the defendant's intentions. The judge nodded, and the bailiff called Robert to the stand. Jessica stiffened as he entered, his face pale and drawn. He looked nothing like the smug, confident man I had confronted at his dealership. He fidgeted as he was sworn in, his eyes darting nervously between Jessica and me. Mr. Anderson, Peter began, his tone calm but firm. You've been involved with Jessica Carter for several months, correct? Robert hesitated, then nodded. Yes. And during that time, did she discuss any plans regarding her marriage or her son? Robert swallowed hard, his hands gripping the edges of the stand. She said she was unhappy, he muttered. That she felt trapped. And did she mention any plans to leave her family? Peter pressed. Robert's face flushed. He hesitated, the silence in the courtroom stretching painfully. Finally, he nodded. Yes. She said she wanted to start over. Somewhere far away. And did she discuss financial arrangements to facilitate this plan? Peter asked. Robert's eyes flicked toward Jessica, who was glaring at him with barely concealed rage. She mentioned moving money, he admitted quietly, to an offshore account. The courtroom erupted in whispers. The judge banged her gavel, calling for order. Jessica shot to her feet, her composure completely shattered. This is ridiculous, she shouted, her voice echoing through the room. I did what I had to do. Mark suffocated me. I needed a way out. I couldn't stay silent any longer. I stood, my voice ringing with fury. While your son was fighting for his life, you were scheming to leave him. Don't you dare call that survival. It's selfishness. The judge's gavel silenced us both, but the damage was done. Jessica's outburst had revealed more than any document ever could. She wasn't just negligent. She was a danger to Ethan's well-being. By the end of the day, the verdict was clear. Full custody of Ethan was granted to me, with Jessica ordered to pay restitution for the diverted funds. The judge also froze her accounts to prevent further financial misconduct and required her to attend counseling before she could have supervised visits with Ethan. As I left the courtroom, a strange mix of relief and exhaustion washed over me. I had won the most important battle, but the war wasn't over. Jessica wasn't the type to accept defeat quietly, and I knew she'd fight back in any way she could. That evening, I returned to the hospital, the weight of the day still heavy on my shoulders. Ethan was awake when I entered his room, his pale face lighting up with a weak smile. Dad, he said softly, his voice hoarse but hopeful. Is everything okay now? I sat beside him, brushing a hand through his hair. Things are going to be okay, buddy, I promise, my voice steady. I'll make sure of it. As he drifted off to sleep, I realized that this wasn't just about winning custody or protecting Ethan from Jessica's selfishness. It was about rebuilding the life she had tried to destroy. For Ethan's sake, I would do whatever it took to ensure his future was safe and secure. But deep down, I knew Jessica wasn't finished. She had underestimated me once. I wouldn't let her do it again. The fight wasn't over, but I was ready for whatever came next. Chapter 5, Unraveling Secrets. 2 days after the court hearing, I received an unexpected call from Peter. His tone was serious, almost hurried. Mark, we've uncovered new evidence, he said. It's more complicated than we thought. What do you mean? I asked, gripping the phone tightly. The forensic accountant found another account Jessica's been using, Peter explained. It's new, and the transactions are larger than anything we've seen before, over $100,000. My stomach dropped. Where's the money going? To a law firm in New York, Peter replied. They specialize in international relocations, specifically cases involving clients who want to leave the country while legally blocking custody claims. The air seemed to leave the room. Jessica wasn't just trying to escape. She was planning something far more sinister. She's planning to run, I said through clenched teeth. It gets worse, Peter continued. They're also filing motions to contest the custody ruling, claiming you're unfit to care for Ethan due to emotional instability caused by the stress of his illness. My fists clenched as a surge of anger coursed through me. She's using Ethan as leverage, I said, my voice low but filled with fury. After everything she's done, she's still trying to twist this into my fault. She's playing dirty, Peter agreed. But we have the evidence to counter her. The key is to stay ahead of her moves. We've already filed an injunction to freeze all her assets, including the funds tied to the law firm. Good, I said, my resolve hardening. She's not getting away with this. That afternoon, I decided to dig deeper. Jessica wasn't acting alone. Someone had to be helping her. My mind kept circling back to Greg, her accomplice in so much of her deceit. If anyone knew more about her plans, it was him. I drove to Greg's dealership unannounced. He looked startled when I entered, his usual smug demeanor replaced with visible unease. Mark, he said nervously, standing as I approached his office. I already told you everything I know. Not everything, I interrupted, slamming a stack of documents onto his desk. What do you know about the law firm in New York? Greg's face paled, and he sank into his chair, his hands trembling. I don't know anything about that. Don't lie to me, I snapped, leaning over the desk. Jessica doesn't do anything without a reason, and I know you've been helping her. So start talking, or I'll make sure you go down with her. Greg's eyes darted around the room, searching for an escape. Finally, he sighed and slumped in defeat. She mentioned something once, he admitted reluctantly. She said if things didn't go her way in court, she had a backup plan. But she didn't tell me the details. She just said the lawyers would handle everything. And the money? I pressed. She told me it was for securing her future, Greg said, his voice barely above a whisper. That's all I know, I swear. I stared at him, my anger simmering just beneath the surface. He was pathetic, a pawn in Jessica's game, but I believed he was telling the truth. Still, his involvement had cost Ethan dearly, and I wasn't about to let him off the hook. As I left the dealership, a thought struck me. Jessica wasn't just reckless. She was calculated. Every move she made was part of a larger plan, and I was determined to uncover it all. Later that evening, Peter called again. His voice was urgent. Mark, there's something else, he said. The shell companies tied to Jessica's accounts are linked to an offshore network known for laundering money. This isn't just about her trying to escape. It's potentially criminal. What kind of criminal? I asked, my heart pounding. Fraud, tax evasion, maybe even embezzlement, Peter explained. We're working with a forensic accountant to trace the transactions, but this goes deeper than we thought. You need to be ready for the fallout. I hung up, my mind reeling. Jessica's betrayal wasn't just personal. It was dangerous. And now it wasn't just about protecting Ethan. It was about stopping Jessica from destroying everything in her path. That night, as I sat by Ethan's bedside, I watched his small chest rise and fall, his breathing steady but fragile. His pale face was peaceful, his body still too weak to fight off the storm swirling around him. I held his hand, my resolve hardening with every beat of his heart. I've got you, buddy, I whispered. No one's taking you away from me. The next morning, I received an email from Peter. Attached was a preliminary report from the forensic accountant. The transactions revealed a series of smaller payments, each seemingly unrelated to Jessica's escape plan. But one stood out, a monthly transfer to a private clinic in another state. My heart raced as I stared at the name of the clinic. Why would Jessica be sending money there? And for whom? Without waiting for Peter's input, I called the clinic directly, posing as Jessica's husband. The receptionist hesitated, but eventually revealed the name tied to the account. Claire. Jessica's estranged sister. The name hit me like a punch to the gut. I hadn't thought about Claire in years. Jessica had made sure of that, shutting down any mention of her with sharp remarks about toxic people. But now here she was, right in the center of everything. I didn't wait to piece things together. Pulling up the clinic's address, I grabbed my keys and left. Ethan was stable, and the nurses assured me they'd call if anything changed. I needed answers, and I needed them now. The drive was tense, my mind racing with possibilities. Why was Jessica sending money to Claire? What kind of treatment required such large sums? And how did this connect to the web of lies Jessica had spun? When I arrived, the clinic's modest exterior betrayed nothing of the secrets it held inside. I approached the front desk, forcing a calm tone as I repeated my lie. I'm Jessica Carter's husband. I'm here to check on the financial arrangements for Claire. The receptionist gave me a wary look before typing into her computer. One moment, she said. I tapped my foot impatiently, scanning the room. It was too quiet, the kind of place where secrets were buried under layers of polished professionalism. Claire isn't here right now, the receptionist finally said. But she's been receiving ongoing care for quite some time. What kind of care? I asked, my voice firm. The receptionist hesitated, glancing nervously around. I'm not at liberty to discuss patient details, sir. I leaned in closer, lowering my voice. I'm her family, and the money we're sending is straining everything. I deserve to know what's going on. She seemed to waver, then sighed. She's receiving treatment for substance abuse, she said quietly. It's a private, long-term rehabilitation program. Substance abuse? My stomach churned. Jessica had been funneling money to this clinic for months, maybe years, without a word. But why the secrecy? And why now when Ethan needed every resource we had? As I left the clinic, my mind was a storm of questions. Jessica wasn't just betraying me and Ethan. She was hiding secrets that could destroy everything and everyone if they came to light. Chapter 6. Threads of Deceit. The drive back from the clinic felt like an eternity. My thoughts raced as I tried to piece together the truth about Jessica's connection to Claire, how it fit into her larger scheme. If Jessica had been funneling money into Claire's treatment for years, then this wasn't just a spur-of-the-moment decision. It was premeditated. Every move Jessica made seemed more calculated than the last. When I got home, the house was eerily silent. The stack of evidence I'd gathered sat on the kitchen table, a reminder of how deep Jessica's lies ran. I sat down, staring at the documents as my phone buzzed on the table. It was Peter. Mark, he said without preamble, we've found something major. What is it? I asked, bracing myself. The offshore account Jessica's been using? It's connected to multiple shell companies. But here's the kicker, those companies have been receiving steady deposits from another account, one we hadn't identified until now. The transactions are recent, and the amounts are substantial. My grip on the phone tightened. How substantial? Over $100,000, Peter replied grimly. And it's not going to Claire or Greg. It's going to a law firm in New York. A law firm? I echoed, my stomach sinking. They specialize in international relocations, Peter explained, primarily for clients who want to block custody rulings while moving abroad. The room seemed to spin as the weight of Peter's words sank in. Jessica wasn't just planning to leave. She was preparing to erase Ethan and me from her life entirely. We filed an injunction to freeze her assets, Peter continued. But Mark, you need to understand, this isn't just about custody anymore. If she's working with this law firm, she's planning something big. Something final. I won't let her, I said, my voice firm. Whatever she's planning, I'll stop her. The next morning, I woke with a renewed sense of determination. Jessica had underestimated me for the last time. If she thought she could manipulate the system, I'd show her that I was a step ahead. But before I could make my next move, my phone buzzed again. This time, it was an unknown number. "Mark," a voice said on the other end. It was calm but deliberate, each word carrying a weight that immediately set me on edge. "We need to talk." "Who is this?" I demanded. "It's Claire," she replied. My breath caught in my throat. After years of silence, Jessica's estranged sister was suddenly reaching out. "What do you want?" I asked, my voice sharp. "You think you have it all figured out, don't you?" Claire said, a faint hint of mockery in her tone. "But you're only scratching the surface." "Then enlighten me," I shot back. There was a long pause before she spoke again. "Meet me at Grayson Park tomorrow at noon. Come alone." Before I could reply, the line went dead. The next day, I arrived at the park early, my eyes scanning the quiet, tree-lined paths for any sign of Claire. She emerged from the shadows of a large oak tree, her appearance more composed than I expected. She looked nothing like the troubled woman I remembered from years ago. Her expression was guarded, her posture tense. "What's this about?" I asked, keeping my distance. Claire smirked, folding her arms. "I'm surprised Jessica didn't tell you herself. But then again, she's always been good at keeping secrets." "Cut to the chase," I said, my patience wearing thin. Claire stepped closer, her eyes narrowing. "You know why she's been sending me money, don't you?" "For your treatment at the clinic," I replied. Claire let out a bitter laugh. "That's the story she's been feeding you?" "Of course it is. Jessica always was the master manipulator." "What are you talking about?" I demanded. "She wasn't paying for my treatment," Claire said, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "She was paying me to keep quiet." My stomach dropped. "About what?" Claire glanced around, as if ensuring no one could hear her. "Jessica's been embezzling money for years, long before Ethan got sick, long before Greg. She used me as her scapegoat, funneling money through accounts in my name. When I threatened to expose her, she bought my silence." The weight of her words hit me like a freight train. "You're lying," I said, though the conviction in my voice wavered. "Am I?" Claire shot back, pulling a flash drive from her pocket. "Everything you need to know is on here. Bank statements, transfer records, even emails where she lays out the whole scheme. She's been planning this for years, Mark." Ethan's illness was just the excuse she needed to accelerate her plans. I stared at the flash drive, my hands trembling. "Why are you telling me this now?" Claire's expression softened, if only slightly. "Because she doesn't deserve to get away with it. And because you deserve to know the truth." Before I could say anything else, Claire turned and walked away, leaving me standing in the park clutching the drive like a live grenade. That night, Peter and I reviewed the files. The evidence was damning. Every transaction, every lie Jessica had told, was laid out in black and white. Jessica hadn't just betrayed Ethan and me. She had orchestrated a web of deceit that reached deeper than I ever could have imagined. "This changes everything," Peter said, his voice grim. "With this, we can bring criminal charges against her. She won't just lose custody, she'll lose everything." I stared at the screen, anger and betrayal warring within me. Jessica had gone too far. She wasn't just trying to escape her responsibilities. She was trying to erase them. And I wasn't going to let her. The next steps were clear. It was time to end this once and for all. Chapter 7, The Final Stand. The courtroom was filled to capacity for the final hearing. The stakes couldn't have been higher. This wasn't just a custody battle anymore. It was a fight to expose Jessica for everything she had done. The evidence Claire had provided was airtight, painting a picture of fraud, betrayal, and a callous disregard for her own family. Jessica arrived late, her face pale but composed. She wore a sharp gray suit, but the confidence she'd flaunted in the previous hearings was nowhere to be seen. Her attorney whispered furiously in her ear, but her gaze never left the floor. Peter leaned toward me as the proceedings began. "Stick to the facts, Mark. We've got this." The prosecution wasted no time presenting the evidence. The flash drive from Claire had been submitted, and the judge reviewed it carefully. The courtroom was silent as Peter laid out the case. "Your Honor, Jessica Carter has engaged in years of fraudulent behavior," Peter began, his voice calm and authoritative. "She has embezzled family funds, funneled them into offshore accounts, and used shell companies to hide her actions. This isn't just neglect. It's a calculated effort to escape her responsibilities and abandon her son." The judge's expression grew harder with each piece of evidence. Bank statements were displayed, showing large transfers to offshore accounts. Receipts from luxury hotels and dinners with Greg followed, along with a damning flight itinerary to the Cayman Islands. Then Peter presented the final blow: the emails Jessica had sent to Claire and her attorney. In one email, Jessica outlined her plan to leave the country, ensuring no one, not even Ethan, could find her. The courtroom erupted in murmurs, silenced only by the judge's gavel. Jessica's attorney attempted to counter, spinning a narrative of a desperate woman trapped in an unhappy marriage. But the evidence was too overwhelming. When Greg took the stand, his testimony sealed her fate. "She told me," Greg admitted, his voice trembling, "that the money wasn't just for her. She wanted to make sure no one could track her. Not Mark, not even Ethan." Jessica's composure finally cracked. She stood abruptly, her voice rising in anger. "This is absurd. I did what I had to do. Mark suffocated me. I needed a way out. I couldn't stay silent any longer." I rose to my feet, my voice firm and steady. "While your son was fighting for his life, you were scheming to leave him. Don't you dare try to justify this as survival. It's selfishness." The judge's gavel struck again, silencing the room. Jessica sat back down, her face pale, her mask of control completely shattered. When it was my turn to speak, I faced the judge, my hands steady despite the storm of emotion swirling inside me. "This isn't just about money," I began. "It's not just about betrayal or lies. It's about responsibility. When Ethan was at his weakest, Jessica didn't just abandon him. She stole from him. She stole his security, his future, and his trust. No child should ever have to suffer because of a parent's selfishness." I paused, taking a deep breath. "But this isn't about vengeance. It's about giving Ethan a chance to heal, to grow, and to feel safe. That's all I want. That's all he deserves." The judge listened intently, her gaze unwavering. When the closing arguments concluded, the courtroom fell silent, everyone holding their breath for the verdict. Finally, the judge spoke. "The evidence presented here today is overwhelming. Jessica Carter's actions demonstrate not only neglect but a blatant disregard for her responsibilities as a parent. Full custody of Ethan is hereby granted to Mark Carter. Jessica Carter is ordered to pay restitution for the misappropriated funds and will face criminal charges for fraud and embezzlement. Supervised visitation rights may be granted only after counseling and demonstrated rehabilitation." Jessica slumped in her seat, her face pale, as the weight of the ruling settled over her. As the gavel struck, signaling the end of the hearing, a wave of relief washed over me. The fight wasn't over, but the battle that mattered most had been won. That evening, I returned to the hospital. Ethan was awake when I walked into his room, his color improving as the treatments began to take effect. His small hand reached for mine, and I held it tightly, a lump forming in my throat. "Dad," he said softly, "are things better now?" I nodded, brushing a hand through his hair. "They will be, buddy," I promised. "I'll make sure of it." As he drifted off to sleep, I thought about everything we'd been through. Jessica's lies, the sleepless nights, the crushing weight of doubt and fear. It all led to this moment. I had fought for Ethan, not just to protect him, but to give him a life where he could feel safe and loved. In the days that followed, the fallout from the trial continued. Jessica faced criminal charges for her actions, and her accounts were permanently frozen. The remaining funds were allocated to cover Ethan's medical expenses and secure his future. She was granted supervised visitation rights, but only after completing mandatory counseling and rehabilitation. For the first time in months, I felt a sense of peace. The storm that had consumed our lives was finally beginning to clear. Life wasn't perfect, but it was ours. And as I sat by Ethan's bedside, watching him smile faintly in his sleep, I knew we were going to be okay. Family isn't just about blood. It's about love, trust, and the sacrifices we make for those who depend on us. And for Ethan, I was willing to do whatever it took to protect him. As I left the hospital that night, the cool evening air felt lighter. This wasn't just an ending, it was a new beginning. And for the first time in a long time, I believed we were going to be okay.